Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Supatease here with another video, and in this one, we've got the 9.0.5 PTR announcement. This is going to be the next patch in the cycle of patches for Shadowlands, and it appears to be quite a big one when it comes to gearing up systems to do with Shadowlands, as well as some Covenant and Legendary tuning that I was actually starting to think might not happen. There were a lot of Covenants that were, in my mind, otherwise just dead Covenants and a lot of content, and were just completely ignored, and they're actually getting addressed. So in this video, I'm going to go over what's happening to gearing up. What does it mean for PvE players? What does it mean for PvP players? And I'm going to be diving into some of the most notable class changes, which have potential to really shake up what classes are going to be the best moving forward. But first of all, now with 9.0.5 announced in the PTR, the big one was the return of valor points. I feel like when they returned Conquest and the PvP vendors, PvP players were ecstatic about this, being able to have a deterministic gearing method. And I know for myself personally, whenever there's a piece of loot that I need, it's my best in slot, and the only way to get it is through RNG, I am automatically 10 times more likely to hate whatever the activity is that I'm doing because of that. And I'm thinking back even to things like Ashran. If the Accolade Trinket had not been only RNG, I would have enjoyed Ashran a lot more. The fact that I was thrown into it week after week after week after week, regardless of whether I wanted to do it or not, to get a chance at this piece of gear made me dislike it a lot more. And the same is for raiding, although raiding for me personally is organizing too many people is the main frustration for that. But for Mythic Plus, going after the same dungeon for the same trinket over and over, I'm sure a lot of you experienced in Battle for Azeroth, was not enjoyable. So they reintroduced conquest points in PvP, and PvP players are very happy about this. Now it looks like they are going to be returning valor points for Mythic Plus players who were justified in their complaints towards the PvP system being amazing. But I'm glad that what Blizzard did was just made the PvE system better instead of deleting the PvP system. I think this was a much more fair approach. However, it does come with pros and cons. So through this system, it looks like if you complete a Keystone Master achievement, which is all keys in a plus 15 time, you'll be able to use the Valor to upgrade to 220 item level as the max item level through the deterministic gearing path, which is quite high. I'm not 100% sure this is actually the highest, because in PvP, I think we can go to 226. And then if you get the achievement for doing all of the keys plus 10 or higher, you'll be able to upgrade to 213. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out for people who are doing Mythic Plus. My concern for it as a main PvP player was that Mythic Plus may become mandatory again, although in a way a lot better of a format than it was in Battle for Azeroth, because if you're able to earn Conquest, slot that gear in, there are some pieces from Mythic Plus that have versatility that are really good, which would accelerate your gearing up in the start of a new PvP season. This goes both ways, right? Because I would say that PvE players are encouraged to do PvP for Conquest as well for the same reason. So if you are someone who likes doing everything in the game, you will be able to accelerate your gearing by selecting the pieces, if you want to target for PvP, selecting the pieces from the Valor vendor that have versatility to utilize in your PvP set. And then I'm sure also for the Mythic Plus players or PvEers that are crossing over to PvP to get the higher item level weapons, or to get maybe a good statted piece of gear from PvP. You still are likely to get most of your gear from PvP, which is nice. This will just kind of expedite the beginning portions of a new patch towards your gear, although you will need to be really good at Mythic Plus. You will have to be doing 15s in time if you want to even have it remotely equivalent to the gear that you're going to be getting from PvP. So it's interesting that this isn't 226. I was anticipating that, but they left it a little bit lower. Maybe this is to not make it mandatory as a PvP player, maybe. Or they just want raiding to be the highest source of item level gear, and not have it be entirely deterministic. I think this stands for most WoW players, but I think probably most notably PvE, is that you really want that carrot on a stick, right? You want to go for the next upgrade. You want to go for your BIS. So if you could entirely upgrade to the maximum level through deterministic gearing methods, you may hit a stopping point where, well, I'm not pursuing a carrot anymore. What am I doing? Or you might hit that point, right? So I could see maybe limiting it to a 220. This still means that the vault is going to be something that you want to go after. And I think that this will alleviate the problem for players who spam Mythic Plus and just get nothing. You've at least got a currency and a deterministic method towards that, maybe that shiny trinket you really wanted or a piece of gear that you wanted. My only additional upgrade in my mind, to me it's an upgrade to the current systems in the game, is that I would like to see set bonuses similar to benthic gear in Battle for Azeroth. If you don't remember that, benthic gear is what you got from Ashara's zone, and it had bonuses on the gear that only worked in the raid, but it made that gear best in the raid. So you were encouraged to use that targeted gear for raid, and I think taking an approach like that, and they had interesting bonuses that worked in the raid, taking that approach and adding just even a couple of bonuses to pieces of gear, or a set bonus on wearing the main slots of gear to dungeon gear, could help them balance classes in dungeons, while also encouraging players who want to prioritize dungeons to also feel the strongest in dungeons by using dungeon gear. I think this is a system that you could still cross over, right? I could wear my Mythic Plus gear with the set bonuses into PvP. It'll have a good item level if I was performing well, but then I wouldn't get the PvP bonuses that make the PvP gear more of a priority to wear in PvP specifically. To me, this allows crossover because item level will transfer between all content, but set bonuses would allow them to tune specific content. If a class is underperforming in PvP, then hunters get additional 10% agility on their 2 set. This is a very just off the cuff, like random bonus. But then in Mythic Plus, if you've got a spec that's lacking, and again, I'm probably going to be guessing hard here on a spec that's lacking, right? Maybe like Assassination Rogue, they get plus 10 agility. 10% agility on their bonus in dungeons, which only works in the dungeons, and then the PvP gear only works with players, and then even the raid gear only works in the raid. This way, players who want to advance chasing that carrot and advance their ability in whatever content they prioritize or have the time to do, because let's face it, in reality, unless WoW is your job, you're not going to be PvPing at a high level, Mythic Plus at a high level, and raid at a high level. I feel like you're probably putting more hours in a week than it's an insane number of hours. So at least this then lets you maybe casually get into PvP if you're a raider, right? You'll have a high item level, but the PvP player focused player will still have an edge because of the set bonuses. That's just an idea that's been floating around in my head for a while that I would like to see iterated into the game. But let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. Regardless, they've also looked at covenants and legendaries, and that's what we're going to jump into, and a little bit of class tuning as well. The first real notable one that I found was Death and Decay. So previously, Death and Decay would allow Scourge Strike to hit all targets. Now, instead, it's going to allow them to only hit up to 4 targets, which is AoE capping them. This could be a reason why we see a lot of Unholy Death Knights in Mythic Plus, right? The MDI. So I'm 100% not 100% into the details of Unholy Death Knight PvE, but this seems like a pretty big change, not hitting every target in your AoE only down to 4. So maybe they are now honing in on the specs that didn't get completely AoE capped to make sure that they are AoE capped, which could completely change up what the Mythic Plus meta is, because it's still, to some degree, whoever can do the most AoE damage is the most desirable. So this may make Unholy a lot less desirable in PvE. It probably has no implication in PvP whatsoever. And there are just a ton of changes here that don't really matter. There's a lot of just anima focused. If you're interested in seeing some anima changes, I feel like that's more or less you just jump in and maybe you're a little bit excited about it to explore it. So I didn't really pay attention to the anima changes. We see a slight buff to Death's Due, which is the Night Fae Covenant for Death Knights. Now Death's Due will reduce damage enemies deal to you up to 2%. Up 2% up to a maximum of 8%. So the lower end of the RNG is brought up. Again, not probably a massive game changer. Shackle the Unworthy looks like it's also getting a buff. I have not seen really any Kyrian Death Knights, at least in PvP. So this is likely to try and, shore up the least popular choices amongst the specializations. So if you're out there and you're a Kyrian Death Knight for some reason, I don't know why, you like angel wings and rotting flesh, you enjoy that combination, that juxtaposition, you're going to be in a little bit of a better spot. 3% more and dealing 30% more of your attack power. So this dot could become quite fearsome. Again, in PvP, it's probably dispellable. It's an arcane spell. Not sure in PvE, right? Because it's not a really big AoE one. And it seems like the AoE ones tend to be better in PvE because AoE damage is just higher overall. Fodder to the Flame is basically getting deleted for Havoc Demon Hunter. So let's just move down to Demon Hunter. It's getting replaced. And for some reason, they didn't put it up here, what they're replacing it with. It's at the bottom, so we'll get back to it. But Fodder to the Flame, the one where you summoned in a demon, is really awkward. You had to kill it. It put a puddle on the ground. You're like, how am I going to stand in this? What's going on? It was already hard enough to get a tank to stand in AoE on classes that had to do that, let alone this thing. So Fodder to the Flame is actually getting a rework, and that's a big one that'll get to at the bottom of all these changes because for some reason it's not listed here. Aside from that, not really any massive changes to Demon Hunter specifically that I noted. I guess we're going to see a little bit of a nerf to the Kyrian Covenants, which in PvP no one was running. Everyone's pretty much running the Hunt. And then in PvE, this is probably taking quite a bit, but this is probably targeted towards Vengeance Demon Hunter, I feel like, more than Havoc. We don't feel like we see a lot of Havoc Demon Hunters in Mythic Plus. So, but if you were a Kyrian Demon Hunter, you are going to be nerfed quite substantially by 10% damage, and then the Conduit basically nerfed in half throughout its scaling. Resto Druid's got a buff to Rejuvenation. Heals the target for 116%. So Rejuve looks like it got a slight buff. This is probably PvE tuning, but in PvP, you're happy to see a little bit of a buff. Adaptive Swarm also. As a PvP druid, you're really happy to see this, but in PvE, this probably wasn't taken very much. This makes it very good now for Resto Druid in PvP. I'm not sure in PvE. I feel like maybe even having Convoke the Spirits is a lot of damage. Venthyr is a lot of throughput. But in PvP, as a druid, as a Resto Druid in particular, you're very happy to see Adaptive Swarm get pretty big buff. 30% spell power, 30% spell power, and your hots are 5% more. As Boomkin, I don't know if you'll take this anymore. As Guardian, it's still really good in PvE. Again, Moonkin dots just don't do damage, so buffing 0 by 25% is 0. I'm not sure if this will save it for Moonkin. It's still got good defensive options in PvP. PvE, you don't care about that. But as Resto Druid in PvP, you're very happy about this. Now, moving into Venthyr. Venthyr is also getting a haste stack and a crit stack, or crit stack buff, and the scaling on their Conduit. Ravenous Frenzy to me is still just, it's basically the same as the Kyrian one on a 3 times the cooldown with a negative side effect that it stuns you if you don't keep casting a random spell or moving. I'm not sure if that's enough to save it. I'm still not interested in it. I think it's probably more interesting than the Kyrian one, but the Kyrian one is just so good, and they're very similar to each other. Kindred Spirits just activate this for damage every minute. This one's activate damage every 3 minutes, but it's really awkward to use, and maybe it's more damage. I mean, in PvE, where you're not interrupted, might be, but in PvP, where you're likely to not get all of the spells off, have enemies run away, it's very difficult to pull off in PvP. So maybe this will change PvE, but I kind of doubt it for PvP. Now for Hunters, you're going to see the Necrolord Covenant slightly buffed. This is, again, not a massive game changer like a lot of the other ones. Just 4% more damage on Death Chakram. Likely still Kyrian for Resonating Arrow in PvP is still going to be very good. I think you're also running Resonating Arrow in PvE, or maybe still Night Fae. Again, AoE versus single target versus kind of this chunk cooldown, burst cooldown. I don't really think this is going to change up Hunters. It's just if you happen to want to be a Necrolord Hunter, you're slightly better than you were. Anima Powers, which I wasn't really looking at. And then Flayed Shot got a pretty chunky buff. So changed from 10, so it has 0 cost. Its duration got buffed to 18 seconds. It does 30% more damage. I mean, this thing seems like it could be really good. And it also increases your kill shots damage by 25%. So I was thinking that this could maybe revive Hunter by if you want to switch over to Venthyr Hunter, but get these big chunky kill shots out with Beast Mastery and PvP just getting a buff as well to their Bestial Wrath. This could have more implications. Again, probably for PvP. In PvE, this is a single target ability. It's really tough to compete with the AoE ones when AoE matters for your total throughput and your time cleared and your high parsing. But probably PvP, you may want to look at Venthyr as a hunter a little more closely. Mages, just anima powers. We're going to see some changes to their covenant abilities. Deathborn gets a buff. It's just a really weird one. Right now, you're only seeing Fire Mage in Mythic Plus, and they're all running Night Fae for cooldown reduction. This buff really, I don't think, does too much. It's going to last 5 seconds longer, and it's going to be 5% more damage. It's just a really bulky cooldown. Again, similar problem to the Venthyr for Druid, and then its bonus doesn't really matter that much. It's 3 times the cooldown for this kind of just meh bonus. There's no real like PvP utility to make it useful in PvP like we're going to see some other Covenant abilities got. I don't think that just a flat buff here is going to change it for PvP. For PvE, it's just a numbers game. Maybe 5% up and 5 seconds longer. For other, I think likely would be only for not fire mages in PvE. Reducing your combustion is just amazing on shifting power. And I think that goes for fire mage in PvP too. So maybe frost, but again, you get some defensive bonuses, but mage is already pretty much unkillable in PvP from Necrolord, so you don't really care about the defensive bonuses. For Mirrors of Torment, now it's going to give you clear casting, which just gives you some extra damage instead of just flat out 4% mana, trying to make it maybe more viable for PvE. But also the silence is now 6 seconds up from 4 seconds. Frost mages have been getting a lot of buffs in PvP just across the board. A 6-second silence as a frost mage is a really long silence on top of Door of Shadows. And I know a lot of mages that were frost were sticking with Venthyr. This is a pretty nice buff to the offensive crowd control of this. And I'm curious to see how it plays out. In PvE, again, single target ability. I'm not sure if it will allow you to compete with shifting power from Night Fae. Radiant Spark getting a nice little chunky buff too. Spark that causes 20% more damage. You were really caring more about the buff to your damage after you cast it, but that also got buffed by almost 10%. So if you're one of those mages that like going for those Radiant Spark big hits of damage, you're going to be a little bit happier. But also because Mirrors of Torment and Radiant Spark got buffed along with Deathborn, Deathborn still probably remains at the bottom. But some interesting changes that could spark meta changes I see in PvP, but probably not in PvE. Mistweavers are going to get some mana cost adjustments. So Renewing Mist is literally 0.1% less mana, not a big deal. And then Vivify is also 0.3% less mana cost. And Mistweaver in PvP just got a mana adjustment. This is going to help you out in PvP just by the smallest amount. I don't think it's going to be a huge deal, but it helps you out in PvE by a small amount as well. For Holy, we see a pretty big change. Holy Shock's mana cost is going up by 2%. Holy Paladins, at least in PvP, were having amazing mana throughput, and mostly because their instant cast spells were very low on mana cost. Well, now their main instant cast spell costs 2% more mana. That's, although it seems small, could likely bring Paladin more in line with the other healers come 9.0.5. Vanquisher's Hammer, I had a tough time reading this one. It looks like now it's the same ability, but it generates holy power. So you're going to get a little bit of holy power generation. I've not seen Vanquisher's Hammer really taken anywhere. With Ashen Hollow being amazing, just burst damage in PvE and even PvP. It just kind of is a lackluster hit. And I don't really feel like this is going to change much, getting a holy power on it for Vanquisher's Hammer. I didn't pay much attention to this. If you're a Paladin and you think that I'm wrong about this, please let me know. But I've basically ignored this in all content on my Paladin as almost every spec. Now, Spirit Shell is getting nerfed. It's likely targeted towards raid. Maybe some implications in PvP. Some priests, I think, were running it, but not really too many. This is just to try and, reduce the pre-stacking going on in raids. Also makes them a bit weaker, potentially in Mythic Plus. Not 100% certain on Spirit Shell's selection in Mythic Plus, though, but it's definitely towards raids. Kiss of Death is getting a pretty big buff. Shadow Word Death cooldown reduced by 12 seconds now, up from 8. So maybe a good anti-crowd control legendary in PvP. In PvE, again, it's a single target one. Doesn't really directly affect your throughput. Touch of Death is tough to use on boss encounter. Shadow Word Death is tough to use on boss encounters. So maybe it sees a little bit of use, but there's a lot of good throughput legendaries that are competing with this, so it's hard to say. They've included some Soulbind conduits, but they still look the same, and there's not any green text, so I don't think that we saw any conduit changes. Again, anima changes. I'm leaving that more up to just you jump in and you see it. Night Fae priests are getting a pretty substantial buff, basically 15% damage reduction on their power word shield target now while their fairies are active, up from 10%. And your targets major ability by 150%. The cooldown recovery rate. Cooldown recovery rate was kind of meh in a lot of classes at the moment. But basically looks like you're getting slightly more effective fairies. And I thought that there might be your Fae Guardians behind an 80% effective copy of their benefits. So the copy, so that it'll stay back. So just trying to increase this. Now, the fairies for priest, I think I saw in MDI, but in PvP, really not too many. It was really good for mana efficiency on Discipline Priest, but Mind Games is so important and impactful in the current game state, with healing being so high on a lot of classes, that Mind Games feels necessary at most of the time. So this will help you out a little bit in PvP, I think, as a Discipline Priest who wanted to go Night Fae, but I don't think it's going to still be a priority for PvP over Mind Games, which I don't think we received any other changes. Just, yeah, Night Fae got a buff for Priest. Rune Carving powers, Shadow where Death expires, he heals. This one was really weird. Never was going to be taken in my mind for PvP, but maybe in PvE you get a little bit more throughput with this. It's tough to say. That one was just a minor buff. Rogue just got some rewording on their text. I don't think we're going to really see. I don't remember seeing anything specifically to Rogue other than this weird one. And I've not paid much attention to Flagellation, to be honest, because in the beta it was not complete, and then the iteration that came out was really awkward. And then, so maybe this, but I'm almost tempted not to read this, with this being a PTR build. I think I'm just going to leave it there, but it looks like maybe Flagellation increases your attack range by 6 yards. Could have a big deal for Outlaw Mythic Plus, but probably unlikely with Kyrian being so good throughput-wise. I would have liked to have seen some PvP-specific nerfs to Endurance Conduits. Conduits like this, where you enter stealth, you get a 10% shield, is not doing anything in PvE, but in PvP it's removing outplay value against your opponents. And there are a lot of Endurance Conduits that when you blink you heal, when you dip low, Frenzy Regeneration automatically triggers. And there's a lot of mechanics that are taking away outplay potential in PvP that are most notably Endurance Conduits. I do think that you could even just take a blanket approach to this by reducing the effectiveness of Endurance Conduits in PvP. We saw something like this in Battle for Azeroth when they reduced endurance, well, the inner ring, healing ring of Battle for Azeroth abilities or Azerite traits. So moving forward, depending on how the game pacing feels after these changes that they've been making, which I like their approach, I think that targeting Endurance Conduits would be wise. As far as Shamans, Fae Transfusion's getting buffed pretty substantially. We saw it in the arena tournament. Pretty cool ability, just like sucking out a bunch of damage and healing out at the same time. Kind of just like this Force Lightning Sith Lord looking fairy ability. It was really cool. It's getting a pretty substantial buff. Its throughput increased to 117% of your spell power, up from 94. And then it will release 60% of all damage as healing, up from 40%. Also, Lightning Shield is getting a random buff, pretty buff, up to 15% of your spell power, up from 4%, 10% buff. So maybe Lightning Shield is going to be scary to attack into against Shamans in PvP. Mythic Plus, I don't know if this will have much play around, or if there are any legendaries maybe that synergize with Lightning Shield doing damage, but maybe I think this is probably more bigger implications in PvP. I'm imagining an enhancement shaman, you're attacking them, and then they're just... This is like Thorns damage going back at the caster. Primordial Wave is also getting a buff. In PvP, you saw a lot of this, but in PvE, I think you're seeing more Venthyr, at least Resto Shaman. Primordial Wave is now going to cause your next healing wave to heal all targets affected by Riptide by 150%, up from 100. So the casted portion of it, none of the cheesy part. It also doesn't look like it's targeting... Actually, your next lightning bolt, that's a pretty big deal for Ellie. For enhancement, in PvP at least, you're not probably going to still want this, but as Ellie, your Stormkeeper, is getting 50% buff on that lightning bolt, that's a big deal. Resto Shaman, get a little bit of cleave healing, probably more implication in PvE, but I don't think you'd still take it for PvE. But this could have big buffs to Ellie in PvP from Primordial Wave, and you don't really need to worry about making any changes. A bunch of Anima power changes we're not going to worry about. We already went through the Covenant changes. Vesper Totem also getting a buff, pretty substantial, 64% up to 80%, 73% up to 91%. PvP, you still have the downside of this totem being killed, but maybe this revives it in PvE for AoE to compete more with Venthyr, although Night Fae got buffed as well. It leaves it a little bit more on the table for which ones to go for in PvE. I think Venthyr was likely the go-to. For PvE, now Vesper Totem maybe getting revived. I didn't really like Vesper Totem because you had to like target this totem. It's just... I wasn't a big fan of it, just in general. Affliction Locks, you're a little bit sad. Malefic Rapture is getting nerfed. That's just your Soul Shard Spender, going down from 0.335 down to 0.27 time spell power. It seems like a very small number. I'm not sure if this will really matter too much in PvP, but you don't really... As a Warlock player, you're probably not very happy to see nerfs, at least in PvP, and there's not really any changes aside from that to your Warlock, none to their Covenant. Actually, okay, I'm incorrect here. Impending Catastrophe for Venthyr Warlocks, although in PvP you're pretty much only running Night Fae. You get to look forward to a 2% buff on Impending Catastrophe, as well as your dot getting buffed by 18% on Impending Catastrophe. Will you run Venthyr Warlock over Night Fae and lose the mobility, and also have the same School of Magic Shadow over getting to cast Nature? Probably not enough of a buff in PvP to make you change. Probably trying to even this out again in PvE. I don't know if that buff is enough to do that. Warrior is getting a really big change to their Soulbinds, and I'm talking about Necrolord Covenant specifically, and I'm trying to scroll through to find it, because for some reason the Warrior one, which is the biggest one, as well as Demon Hunter, were randomly at the end. So it looks like Condemn now, well, if your foe survives, 20% of the rage spent on Condemn will be refunded. That seems like a really big deal. I don't know if that's just a reword, because it looks like it was already there. So I don't really want to talk about Condemn too much. I think it's more important we talk about Conqueror's Banner, which was the Necrolord one that gave you crit and health. It was just kind of meh. Now it gives you Mastery, 500 Mastery, and increases your movement speed by 30%, and also prevents 2 of your nearest allies' movement speed from being reduced below 100%. It lasts 15 seconds, and it generates 4 rage per second. So this Conqueror's Banner, 500 Mastery, is Pelagos level Mastery at the start of the expansion that was allowing people to just crush people. Although this is on a much longer cooldown than the Spirit Bastion, this will also buff your allies. And if you're playing with a Kyrian class that can stand in your banner and get 500 Mastery, big deal. Movement speed doesn't really matter, but it makes this cooldown a lot more scary, a lot more like get out of this zone, similar to Ashen Hollow, than it did before. Definitely than it did before. So maybe Necrolord Warrior as like a team utility defense option in PvP, and maybe in Mythic Plus. I mean, 500 Mastery to 2 allies next to you could buff the damage of like an Unholy Death Knight by a lot. So this makes it a lot more interesting to me than the previous iteration of it. As Prot, I'm not sure how valuable Mastery is to you. Prot Warriors just in general, kind of just in a weird spot. But I think 500 Mastery is a pretty big number. That one's going to have to be inspected. And then finally, the one that they hit at the bottom, the big one that I've been waiting to tell you about, was Fodder of the Flame, the weird demon one. Your damaging abilities have a chance to call forth a demon from the Theater of Pain for 25 seconds. Throw Glaive will instantly kill the target. So now you no longer need to deal with doing damage to it, right? You got an instant kill button. So you throw Glaive, the demon explodes, dealing massive damage, 175% of your attack power to nearby enemies, and healing you for 25% of your maximum health. The explosion deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets, so to kind of AoE cap it in PvE. But in PvP, I mean, if this thing hits harder than the Hunt, you may want to just switch, because the only reason you're playing Night Fae in PvP, at least, is for Hunt damage. For Mythic Plus, it's AoE, but it doesn't say what the cooldown is, does it? Is the only thing. And it was one that was really hard. If I get any updates to this, I feel like it was a pretty long cooldown. 2 minutes, it looks like. And it doesn't look like it puts a puddle on the ground anymore, at least from what I'm reading. So it's like a demon bomb. You just call in this demon and poof, everything dies. So it's kind of cheeky. It's a lot less awkward. Still got to like aim it, right? Like the demon's got to get close to the target. Still has some downsides. But if this thing hits hard, you're going to want it. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. And in my mind, Fodder of the Flame and the Conqueror's Banner for Warrior Demon Hunter were some of the most trash ones overall in the game. Just like completely ignored. Maybe the Mage Necrolord one too. But these are some big ones that might be, you may want to flip your Covenant over or test the PTR. But other than that, that's it for the changes that I was able to find now. I'm very excited for the future of Shadowlands overall. Gearing improvements to PvE, as well as Covenant adjustments to try and make the Covenants more even with each other, so you don't feel like you're totally boned when you go after the one that you would prefer to go after rather than just performance. So overall, I'm pretty happy. with these changes so far throughout Shadowlands. If you're happy as well, leave a comment down below. Other than that, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's free. Just let you know when the videos go live, and I'm doing my best to bring these updates as fast as possible in real time so that you're always on top of what's going on, and meta changes, meta adjustments, maybe a potentially your favorite spec that you just like, oh, it's so bad, and maybe it's randomly good. That's the main purpose of this, is to just share my opinion and give you the updates. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.